He was an autistic boy from Mumbai who everyone considered limited. His only obsession was looking at letters and symbols that no one understood. A lost cause, not for his mother, who saw a gift where everyone else saw a flaw. On the day of his ceremony, everyone discovered that he was not limited. He was a prodigy. I think you'll be thrilled to discover how he silenced a crowd, reading in 6 different languages, from Hindi to Mandarin. Please watch the full video to understand this incredible journey. And of course, before continuing, subscribe to the channel, like it, and tell us in the comments where you are following us from. In the vibrant cacophony of Mumbai, where the air is a thick mix of spices, incense, and the incessant honking of rickshaws, Priya's home was a sanctuary of silence. Not a peaceful silence, but a deep, observant silence. The silence of her son, Rohan. At 9, Rohan navigated the world on a current of his own. Diagnosed with severe autism, his universe was constructed not of words but of patterns. He saw geometry in the tiles of the floor, heard mathematics in the rhythm of the monsoon rain, and felt the texture of the city under his fingers. While other children in the neighborhood chased a cricket ball through the dusty alleys, Rohan would spend hours in his room, absorbed in tracing the intricate curves of the Devanagari alphabet or the sharp angles of Latin letters in old newspapers. To the outside world, it was empty, repetitive behavior. To Priya, her mother, it was the language of an extraordinary mind that she was still learning to read, a mystery she would dedicate her life to unraveling. Priya's journey as a mother was a silent battle fought on multiple fronts. The first was against the chorus of well-meaning but painfully ignorant voices. Relatives, neighbors, even some doctors. He'll never speak properly, Priya. You need to accept his reality. A special school would be best for him and for you. Each sentence was a small stone thrown against the wall of her faith. The second front was school, a place that was supposed to be inclusive but that too often became a field of judgment. She fought for Rohan to attend a regular school, believing that interaction, even if silent, was crucial. But in practice, inclusion was a formality. Rohan was the child in the corner, the boy who didn't respond to call, the phantom presence that overworked and ill-equipped teachers often didn't know how to reach. School festivals like Diwali were the hardest tests of Priya's heart. They were celebrations of light and color and community. But for Rohan, they were a sensory overload. And for her, a public display of their shared loneliness. While other mothers gathered, laughing and comparing their children's grades, Priya stood by Rohan's side, a silent guardian. He had his hands over his ears to muffle the sound of the fireworks, and she had a forced smile on her face to muffle the ache in her heart. The looks of pity were the worst. They were like a cold touch, a constant reminder that the world saw her son not as a unique child but as a problem, a tragedy. And she, by extension, was the mother who refused to see the truth, the stubborn woman who insisted on fighting a losing battle. Despite the world's disbelief, Priya's faith was fueled by what she saw in the quiet moments within the 4 walls of her home. She began to notice that Rohan's fixation with letters was not random. He wasn't just looking at them, he was absorbing them. One day she found him watching a British news channel. His eyes were not on the screen, but on the subtitles. The next day, she saw him lining up his letter blocks to form simple English words: cat, sun, blue. He wasn't saying them out loud, he was constructing them. They were sculptures of meaning. Priya felt a spark of something extraordinary. This wasn't imitation, this was understanding. And so began a silent experiment. She turned their home into a linguistics lab. She bought children's books in Hindi, Bengali, and Tamil. She tuned the radio to French stations and put on Mandarin documentaries on the television. She didn't force Rohan to pay attention. She just let the sounds and symbols fill the room like a new form of music. And she watched. Rohan, in his corner, continued with his letter blocks. But now the patterns he formed were more complex. He grouped letters from different alphabets together, as if comparing their structures, finding the similarities and differences. He wasn't learning to speak. He was reverse engineering human communication itself. While Priya witnessed this quiet revolution, the outside world continued to see only failure. A meeting with Rohan's teacher was a particularly hard blow. "Priya, we've tried everything," the teacher said, with a patience that was more insulting than angry. "He won't participate. He won't respond. Traditional literacy isn't working for him. We need to be realistic about his future." The word realistic was the dagger they always used. It meant no hope. It meant give up. Priya listened, nodded, and inside, a flame of determination burned brighter. How could she explain her son's genius to a world that believed only in what could be measured by standardized tests and verbal responses? The other parents' mockery grew louder as time went on. At a parent-teacher conference, she heard one parent say to another in a whisper loud enough to be heard, "I'm glad my son is normal. Imagine all that woman's effort for nothing." The casual cruelty of the sentence hit her with the force of a punch. She turned, ready to confront him, but her eyes met Rohan's, who was standing with her. He didn't seem to have heard. His gaze was fixed on a poster on the wall, a poster for an international school event, with welcome messages in several languages. His eyes darted from one line to the next, from Hindi to English to French to Mandarin, and on his face, there was no confusion, but an expression of pure, intense concentration, like a codebreaker faced with a secret message. It was at that moment that Priya understood the true nature of her son's gift. He wasn't learning languages in a linear, word-by-word fashion. He was absorbing them holistically, as complete systems. He saw grammar as architecture, vocabulary as a palette of colors. His mind wasn't trapped in a single language. It was a neural network finding the universal patterns that connected them all. What the world saw as his greatest limitation, his inability to focus on normal, was actually the source of his power. His mind wasn't confined. It was free, traveling across cultures and continents through the beauty of symbols and sounds. She held this revelation close to her heart, a precious secret, and she waited for the right opportunity to share it with the world. The opportunity came unexpectedly. The graduation ceremony for elementary school was approaching. It was an event Priya had been dreading. It would be another ritual of exclusion, with Rohan sitting in silence while other children received awards for participation, for public speaking, for being normal. She had considered not going, to spare herself and her son that familiar pain. But then, one sleepless night as she watched Rohan sleep with his tablet on his lap, the screen still lit with Tamil characters, the idea struck her, an idea so bold, so terrifying, so brilliant that it took her breath away. The stage, the microphone, graduation. It wouldn't be a humiliation. It would be a revelation. The next day, she approached the school principal, Mr. Sharma, a man who, despite his formality, had always shown a hint of compassion and curiosity about Rohan. She didn't try to explain her son's genius. She knew she would be met with skepticism. Instead, she made a simple, mysterious request. "I would like Rohan to attend the graduation ceremony," she said. "I know he won't be giving a speech, but he would like to deliver a special message, a surprise." The principal was intrigued. The idea of Rohan, the quietest boy in school, wanting to take the stage was so unlikely that it piqued his curiosity. "A surprise? What kind of surprise?" he asked. "I can't spoil it," Priya replied with an enigmatic smile, "but I promise it will be something no one will ever forget." Driven more by curiosity than conviction, the director agreed. Preparation began in secret at Priya's house. She and Rohan worked together, not as mother and son, but as director and artist. She helped him select a short phrase, a thank you, and then helped him translate it into 6 different languages using the online resources he loved so much. He practiced pronunciation by listening to the sounds on his tablet and repeating them in a whisper. For the visuals, he typed each phrase himself on his tablet, choosing fonts that he felt visually represented each language. It was their project, a shared secret, a small conspiracy of love and hope against a world of disbelief. The day of the ceremony arrived, and the air in the school auditorium was thick with a mixture of pride and melancholy. It was a day of celebration and farewell. Priya found a seat in the back, her heart pounding wildly. She saw the other parents, some who looked at her with pity, some who scoffed. They smiled and took pictures of their normal children, dressed in their graduation uniforms. And she saw Rohan sitting with his class, a small island of calm amidst the excitement. He didn't seem nervous. He was in his own world, as always. But Priya knew that this time, he was about to invite everyone into it. The ceremony dragged on with its usual predictability. Teachers' speeches, awards for the best students, musical performances. Priya barely listened. Her entire being was focused on the moment that was about to come. She held her hands so tightly that her knuckles were white. She alternated between absolute faith in her son and paralyzing panic. What if he froze? What if he refused to go on stage? What if the world, finally getting a chance to see him, laughed at him? Doubt was a cold poison, and she had to fight it with all her might, repeating to herself the words that had become her own mantra. He's ready. He's ready. Finally, the principal, Mr. Sharma, took the stage for the closing remarks. And now, he said, his voice booming over the speakers, we have a special surprise presentation by one of our graduates. A student who, though often silent, has much to tell us. A murmur ran through the audience. Who could it be? All eyes were on the stage. Priya held her breath. The principal smiled and announced, "Please give a round of applause for Rohan." The silence that followed was absolute. Rohan, the boy who doesn't speak? For a moment, the audience was frozen in a mixture of shock, confusion, and cruel curiosity. It was the moment of truth. Rohan's walk from his chair to the steps to the stage was the longest and loudest of his life. Each step seemed to echo in the stunned silence of the auditorium. The murmurs began, a wave of whispers spreading through the audience. Is that Priya's son? What's he going to do? He won't even talk. Priya, in the back of the auditorium, felt each of those whispers like a tiny needle in her skin. She clenched her hands together, her fingernails digging into her palms, a physical pain to distract from the whirlwind of panic and hope that consumed her. She focused on her son, on the way he walked slowly, but with a determination she had never seen before. He wasn't looking at the audience. His eyes were fixed on the microphone. As he climbed the steps to the stage, Rohan didn't stumble. His movements were deliberate, careful. He positioned himself in front of the microphone, which was too high for him. The director, Mr. Sharma, quickly came over and adjusted it to his height, giving Rohan an encouraging smile. Rohan held his tablet in both hands, its screen glowing in the stage lights. For a moment he just stood there, the silence in the auditorium now total, thick, charged with an almost cruel curiosity. A few parents shifted in their seats impatiently. A few students giggled softly, elbowing each other. To them this was a strange spectacle, a bizarre interlude in an otherwise predictable ceremony. They had no idea that they were about to witness a miracle. Priya could feel the stares. She could feel the pity, the skepticism, the veiled mockery. Part of her wanted to scream, wanted to stand on that stage and protect her son, to take him away from this exposure, this judgment. But another part, the part that had planned this moment, knew she had to trust him. She had laid the foundation, given him the tools, but the performance, the final execution, had to be his. This was his symphony, and he had to be the conductor. She took a deep breath, forcing her lungs to fill with air that felt devoid of oxygen, and whispered into the silence, "You can do it, my son. Show them. Show them all." It was a prayer, a blessing, an act of letting go. Rohan held up his tablet. He didn't look at the audience. He stared at the screen, his refuge, his bridge to the world. He took a deep breath, and then a voice, clear and surprisingly steady, if a little mechanical from disuse, came through the speakers. But it wasn't in his native language. "Aap sabko mera dhanyavad," he said in perfect Hindi, the national language. The phrase, a simple "thank you all," fell over the audience like a stone. The confusion was palpable. Teachers looked at each other, brows furrowed. Parents murmured, trying to understand. Priya saw the reaction, and a small, almost painful smile of triumph began to form on her lips. The first note of the symphony had been played, and, as expected, it had shocked the audience. Without pause, the second sentence came, this time in Bengali, with the lyrical lilt of the language. Shobar proshongshar jono donobad. The murmur in the audience grew louder. Now it was not just confusion, it was astonishment. How was this possible? The boy who had barely been heard whispering in his mother tongue was now speaking another of the great languages of India. Priya saw the father who had mocked her in the hallway lean toward his wife, his face a mask of disbelief. She saw the teacher who had suggested a special school with her mouth slightly open, her eyes fixed on Rohan as if he had just performed a magic trick. The mockery was turning to shock, and Rohan remained, impassive, focused on his task. He stared at the screen of his tablet and read, one sentence at a time, each in a new language, each with the pronunciation and cadence he had memorized audibly and visually. Ungal atu ataravuku na nurai, he said in Tamil, the language of the South, with its distinct sounds. The auditorium was now completely silent, not the skeptical silence of before, but a silence of awe, of wonder. No one moved. No one blinked. All eyes were fixed on this small figure on the stage, who was in real time dismantling every prejudice, every label that had been placed on him over the years. And Rohan remained, impassive, focused on his task. He stared at the screen of his tablet and read, one sentence at a time, each in a new language, each with the pronunciation and cadence he had memorized audibly and visually. "Thank you for your guidance," he said in English, with an accent that sounded like something out of a BBC news program. The auditorium was now completely silent, not the skeptical silence of before, but a silence of awe, of wonder. No one moved, no one blinked. All eyes were fixed on this small figure on the stage who was, in real time, dismantling every preconception, every label that had been placed on him. The mockery was turning to shock, and the shock to admiration. The fifth sentence came in French, the language of diplomacy, and Rohan's voice delivered it with an elegance that seemed far beyond his years. "Merci pour votre patience." By this time, tears were streaming freely down the faces of several teachers in the front row. They were no longer seeing the special needs student. They were seeing a prodigy. They were witnessing a kind of genius they had never encountered in any of their normal students. The realization was sinking in, and with it came a wave of shame and regret. How many times had they underestimated him? How many times had they looked at him and seen only what he could not do, instead of trying to discover what he could? Rohan's performance was a mirror reflecting back to their own failure as educators. The last sentence, the sixth, was the most shocking of all. Rohan looked at the screen, and from the speakers came a series of sounds that were completely alien to most of the people there. Xiexie, Mandarin. The complexity of the tones, the perfect pronunciation, was the final blow. The audience was stunned. 6 languages. The boy they had thought was limited, who could barely communicate in his own language, had just demonstrated a linguistic mastery that most of them would never achieve in a lifetime. The performance was not just a reading, it was a statement that his inner world was not empty, but vast, complex, and extraordinarily beautiful. And that silence sometimes is not absence, but the concentration of immense power. Priya could no longer hold back the tears. They streamed down her face, but they were not tears of sadness or relief. They were tears of pure and utter vindication. It was validation for every struggle, every sleepless night, every frustrating meeting, every mean whisper she had endured. She looked at her son on stage, so small and so huge at the same time, and felt such overwhelming pride that it felt like her heart would burst. She no longer cared about the looks of other parents. Let them look. Let them see. Let them finally see her son, not as she saw him, with the love of a mother, but as he truly was, a quiet genius who had found his own voice. After the last sentence in Mandarin, Rohan paused. He put down his tablet, and then he did something that shocked Priya more than anything else. He looked up from the screen and looked directly at the audience. It was a quick glance, sweeping across the shocked, silent faces. His eyes met those of his mother at the back of the auditorium, and for a split second he smiled. A small, shy smile, but unmistakable. It was a smile of complicity, of a shared secret that was now no longer a secret. And then he stepped up to the microphone and, in his natural voice in his mother tongue for the first time in public, he whispered the words that would seal his triumph. "Dhanyavad, Ma, for never giving up on me." Rohan's final whisper, "Thank you, Mother, for never giving up on me," hung in the air for a moment, filled with devastating purity. And then the silence in the auditorium was broken, not by murmurs, but by an explosion. A wave of applause started in the front row with the teachers and spread through the audience like wildfire. A thunderous sound of clapping hands, of people rising from their seats, of bravos shouted through sobs. This was not a polite end-of-ceremony applause. This was a collective catharsis. It was the sound of prejudice melting away, the sound of surprise turning to admiration. It was the sound of an entire auditorium apologizing, not with words, but with the only universal language left, that of applause. Priya scanned the faces in the crowd and saw the story of her struggle reflected in them. She saw the parents who had once looked at her with pity, now looking at her with an awe that bordered on reverence. The father who had said Rohan would be a burden now applauded with a fury that seemed to erase his own words, his face red with consuming shame. The mothers who had whispered in the aisles were now openly weeping, not in pity for Priya, but in admiration for their son. They were not just applauding a performance, they were applauding a mother's faith, a boy's resilience, and they were silently confronting their own judgments, their own limitations. Rohan's triumph was not just his. It was a mirror that forced everyone to face the ugliness of their own prejudices. The teachers in particular seemed to have been struck by an almost religious revelation. The teacher who had so strongly suggested a special school sat frozen in her chair, tears streaming down her face, the ceremony program crumpled in her hand. In a single moment, all her teaching experience, all her manuals and theories about child development had been pulverized. She had not only failed to teach Rohan, she had failed to see him. She had looked into a universe of potential and seen only a dark room. Rohan's performance was not a language lesson. It was a lesson in the dangers of presumption and the profound ignorance that often hides behind the mask of professional expertise. Priya finally allowed herself to feel. The dam of emotions she had held back for years broke, but the tears that came were not of sadness. They were of a vindication so sweet, so overwhelming, that they took her breath away. Every mockery, every look of pity, every night she had doubted herself, it was all washed away by that wave of applause. She looked at her son, her tiny, giant son standing center stage, and saw not just the child she loved, but a hero, the hero of her own story, the protagonist of her own life. And she, the mother the world thought was deluding herself, was the only one who had always known the end of that script. The pride she felt in that moment was so vast, so luminous, it could have lit up the entire city. Rohan on stage absorbed the wave of sound. To a hypersensitive child, an ovation of that magnitude could have been terrifying, a sensory overload, but it wasn't. The sound coming from the audience wasn't the chaotic noise of a playground or a school dance. It was a unified sound, a sound with a purpose, with a clear emotion, admiration. And Rohan's mind, which worked in patterns, recognized the pattern. He saw the people standing, saw the smiles, saw the tears, and he understood. As calmly as he had walked on stage, he gave a slight nod, a gesture of real thanks, and then he turned, not to the director but to the back of the auditorium, met his mother's eyes, and his small smile widened. Priya's walk from her seat at the back of the auditorium to the stage was the longest and most glorious of her life. Each step seemed to echo with the sound of the unceasing applause. The crowd parted for her, their gazes now filled with an almost reverential respect. The same people who had previously ignored her or looked at her with pity now touched her on the arm, said, "Congratulations, your son is amazing." She accepted their compliments with a nod, but her eyes never left Rohan's small figure on the stage. He was her guiding light, her final destination. The walk down the aisle of the auditorium was not just a walk. It was a victory march, the lap of honor of a warrior who had won the most important battle of her life. When she reached the stage, she didn't rush to hug Rohan. She stopped a short distance away, giving him space, respecting his moment. He turned to her, the shy smile still on his lips, his eyes shining with a light she hadn't seen in a long time. And then, he did something he hadn't done since he was a baby. He held his arms out to her. A clear invitation, a request. Priya took the last few steps and wrapped her arms around him, and the outside world, with its noise and its judgment, simply disappeared. In that embrace, there was no mother and son, no autism, no genius. There were just two souls who had weathered a storm together and had finally reached the safety of the shore. She felt his small body relax against hers and knew that no matter what happened from now on, they would be okay. The sight of the mother embracing her son on stage, under the blinding lights, became the defining image of the ceremony. Photographers from the local newspaper, who were there to cover the event routinely, captured the moment. The image, with Priya's raw emotion and Rohan's serene smile, told a story more powerful than any speech. Within a week, their story was everywhere. Mumbai's quiet genius, read one headline. A mother's faith, read another. The story went viral not just for Rohan's linguistic prowess, but for the universal power of a mother's love and the resilience of a child the world had discarded. Priya began receiving emails and phone calls from other parents of autistic children, thanking her for her courage, asking for advice, sharing their own struggles. The sudden fame was overwhelming, but Priya navigated it with the same grace she had navigated adversity. She turned down offers to do television shows and sensational interviews. She knew that Rohan's story was not a spectacle. It was a lesson. With the help of Mr. Sharma, the school principal who had now become her greatest ally, she agreed to give a one-time interview to a prestigious educational magazine. She didn't talk about superpowers or miracles. She talked about patterns, about patience, about the importance of listening and observing. She described how Rohan's flaw, his fixation on patterns, was actually the source of his genius. She wasn't asking for admiration. She was asking for understanding. Rohan, for his part, dealt with the new attention in his own way. He didn't suddenly become talkative or outgoing. He remained Rohan, but something had changed. The barrier of anxiety that separated him from the world had become thinner, more porous. At school, under the new policy of active listening that he had inspired, teachers began using more visual, pattern-based methods. Other students who had previously ignored him now approached him with respectful curiosity, showing him books in different languages, marveling at his ability to find the logic in them. He still didn't join in their conversations, but now, for the first time, he was present in the same room, connected, no longer an island. The scholarship offered by the school opened up a new world of possibilities. Priya and Rohan spent weeks researching together. They explored programs in computational linguistics, cryptography, musicology. The final decision, however, came from Rohan. One afternoon, he showed Priya an online course offered by a university in Switzerland. It was a course on the history and structure of dead and forgotten languages: Sanskrit, Aramaic, Sumerian. Languages that existed almost purely as written patterns. Priya looked at the complex symbols on the screen, then at her son's fascinated face, and she understood. He didn't just want to learn languages. He wanted to decipher the deepest secrets of human communication. Their lives had found a new balance. Priya, now a sought-after consultant to schools and parents, traveled occasionally to give lectures. But her home base, her center, remained her quiet home, the sanctuary she had built for Rohan. She helped him with his studies, marveling at the ease with which he navigated alphabets that were thousands of years old. And he, in turn, continued to teach her. He taught her to see the world as a text to be read, to find poetry in the mathematics of a fern leaf, to hear the music in the cadence of the rain. He didn't say much, but his presence, his calm and quiet genius, filled the house with a light that was more eloquent than any words. Years later, Rohan, now 18, published his first paper in a prestigious academic linguistics journal. The paper, titled "The Syntax of Emotion: Mathematical Patterns in Cuneiform Languages," was groundbreaking. In it, Rohan argued that ancient languages were not just systems of communication, but also mathematical maps of the emotions and social structures of the cultures that created them. He used his unique insight to find patterns that no one had ever seen before, connecting the shape of a symbol to the emotion it represented. The academic world was astonished. The paper was brilliant, groundbreaking, the work of a genius. Priya read her son's paper, the complex equations and linguistic arguments flying far above her head, but she didn't need to understand the science to understand its meaning. She reached the acknowledgement section at the end of the paper, and there, in a single simple sentence, she found the final validation of her entire journey. Rohan thanked no university, no famous professor, no theorist. He wrote simply, "I thank my mother, Priya, my first and most important teacher, who taught me the most fundamental language of all, the language of faith." And as she read those words, Priya knew her own symphony was complete. Rohan and Priya's story was never about an autistic boy who learned to speak 6 languages. It was about a world that learned to listen. It was about a mother who refused to accept the limits society placed on her son, and instead built a world where his gifts could flourish. It was about the discovery that the greatest disabilities often hide the greatest talents, and that true intelligence lies not in conforming to the world as it is, but in having the courage to see it in a way no one else has seen before. Their journey was a testament to the fact that love, patience, and unwavering faith are not just feelings. They are the most powerful tools we have to change the world. The biggest change, though, was the most subtle. It was in the way the world began to look at Rohan. He was still the quiet boy who preferred the company of his books and his patterns. But now, when he walked around school, people didn't look at him with pity. They looked at him with awed respect. He had become a symbol, a reminder that the most extraordinary minds don't always communicate in the ways we expect, and that the true test of a society is not how it celebrates its obvious geniuses, but how it strives to listen to its quiet ones. Rohan's lesson wasn't about polyglottism. It was about the diversity of the human mind and the beauty found in its most unexpected and misunderstood forms. Priya, in becoming a voice for other parents, also found her own healing. The loneliness that had plagued her for so many years gave way to a sense of community. She realized that her struggle was not unique. There were thousands of other Priyas across India, fighting the same battles, facing the same prejudices. By sharing her story, she was not only giving hope, she was building a support network, an army of parents who refused to accept the limits the world placed on them. Rohan's journey gave her a purpose that went far beyond her own family, transforming her personal pain into a universal mission of empowerment and change. Rohan and Priya's relationship evolved into a silent partnership of intellects. He was the explorer, the decipherer of ancient codes. She was the translator, the bridge between her world of patterns and the world of words. He would show her the beauty of the structure of a hieroglyph, and she would help him articulate that beauty in an essay. He would find mathematics in a sonata, and she would help him explain that mathematics to others. They became a symbiotic team, two minds working in harmony, one visual and one verbal, to unlock the mysteries of communication. Their home, once a sanctuary of protective silence, became a vibrant hub of research and discovery. Rohan's fame grew organically. He never gave a video interview, never appeared on a television show. His fame was built on the strength of his ideas, published in academic journals. He became something of a legend, a reclusive genius whose mind was breaking new ground in the understanding of language. Universities around the world offered him fellowships and research positions. He turned them all down. His laboratory was his home in Mumbai. His only collaborator was his mother. He had no need for the institutions that had once rejected him. He had created his own academy, one founded on faith, love, and the freedom to explore knowledge without the constraints of traditional pedagogy. Principal Sharma visited a few years later, just before he retired. He found a house filled with books in dozens of languages, walls covered with maps of ancient alphabets, and a calm, focused young man working on his tablet. He looked at Priya and said, with a humility he had not possessed years earlier, "I thought our job was to teach the children, but Rohan taught me that sometimes our most important job is to get out of the way and let the children teach us." He was the best teacher this school has ever had. It was the ultimate acknowledgement, the admission that true education is not about imposing knowledge, but about nurturing curiosity, wherever it may lead. Their journey became a quiet inspiration, not a shouted tale of resilience, but a whispered example of the power of neurodiversity. Rohan's story challenged the very definition of communication and intelligence. It showed that a mind that doesn't function according to social norms is not a defective mind, but simply a mind operating on a different operating system, and that often, these alternative operating systems are capable of processing the world in much deeper and more original ways. Rohan didn't learn to fit into the world. He taught the world that there were other ways to exist and understand. One rainy day, Priya found Rohan staring out the window, watching the patterns the raindrops made on the glass. "What do you see, my son?" she asked softly. Rohan turned to her, and for the first time, he answered a direct question with a complete sentence in his native language. "I see the same thing you see, mother," he said, his voice calm and clear. "I see water, but I also hear the music it makes when it meets the glass, and I see the perfect geometry in each droplet. The world is full of languages. Most people only learn to hear one." In that answer was the essence of his gift. He was not limited. He was, in fact, infinitely more connected. Rohan's final paper as a young scholar was a collaboration. It was a paper on language acquisition in autistic children, co-written with his mother. In it, they presented not a theory but a story, theirs. They argued that the autistic brain does not have difficulty learning but learns differently, through the absorption of patterns, and that a caregiver's love and patience are the most important variables in the learning equation. The paper was published not in a linguistics journal but in a psychology and education journal. and it became required reading for a new generation of teachers and therapists. One day, a journalist asked Priya what her proudest moment in her career had been. Everyone expected her to say graduation day, but she smiled and shook her head. "My proudest moment," she said, "was one rainy afternoon when my son described the music of rain to me. That day, I didn't just know he was a genius, I knew he was happy." That answer summed it up. The ultimate goal was never the acclaim of the world, but the inner peace of her son. The triumph was not the applause of a crowd, but the ability to find beauty in the patterns of a rainy day. Rohan and Priya's story is ultimately a story about translation. Not translation between 6 different languages, but translation between 2 worlds, the world of neurotypicality and the world of neurodiversity. It's a story about a mother who became the ultimate translator, learning to read the silent language of her son's patterns so that she could one day translate his genius to the rest of the world. And in the process, she discovered that the deepest communication doesn't need words. It just needs unwavering faith and a heart willing to listen to the music that lies behind the silence. Years later, when Rohan was a young college professor, he was invited to give the commencement address at the same school that had once called him limited. He took the same stage, but this time he didn't need a tablet. He looked out at the audience, met his mother's eyes in the front row, and began his speech. He spoke in a single language, his voice calm and clear. He didn't talk about linguistics or his academic achievements. He talked about the importance of seeing the world through different eyes, about the beauty of patterns, about the power of silence. And he ended his speech with the same words he had whispered years before, but this time with the strength of a man. "Thank you, Mom, for never giving up on me." That second speech was, in some ways, more powerful than the first. The first had been a display of genius that shocked the world. The second was a display of wisdom that touched it. It showed that Rohan's journey was not just about developing his gift, but about learning to share it, to translate his inner world into the language of his heart. He no longer needed to prove that he was smart. He just needed to be himself. And in doing so, he gave everyone in the audience a gift far greater than any display of polyglottism. He gave them a new perspective. Priya, sitting in the audience, felt the cycle come full circle. She watched the boy who hid from the world become the man who taught him. She remembered the years of loneliness, the whispers, the looks of pity, and she felt a surge of gratitude. Not gratitude for the success or the recognition, but gratitude for the journey itself. Every obstacle, every moment of doubt, every tear had been a step on the ladder that brought Rohan to this stage. She understood that her faith had not been a denial of reality, as others had said. It had been the creation of a new reality, a reality where her son was not defined by his limitations, but by his infinite potential. Rohan's legacy went beyond his academic papers. Inspired by his story, schools across India began implementing standards-based learning programs for neurodiverse children. His story became a case study, an example of how education needs to adapt to the child, not the other way around. He never became a celebrity, preferring the quiet of his research, but his quiet influence was profound, changing the lives of thousands of children who, like him, saw the world differently. He didn't just decipher dead languages. He helped create a new language of inclusion and respect. Their home in Mumbai remained a sanctuary, but now it was a sanctuary of shared creation. The walls were covered with maps of ancient alphabets, and the kitchen table was always covered with books in dozens of languages. But now, there was also laughter. There was conversation. There was the sound of two minds, one visual and one verbal, dancing together in perfect harmony. Priya had never learned to see patterns the way Rohan did, and Rohan had never learned to use words as easily as Priya did, and that was perfect. They were two halves of a whole, each complementing the other, living proof that collaboration and love are the most powerful tools for discovery. In one of his rare public appearances at a neurodiversity conference, Rohan was asked how he felt about his autism. He thought for a moment, then typed on his tablet for his mother to read. "The world calls me autistic. I call it an operating system. Mine is neither better nor worse than yours. It just processes data differently. The problem is not the software, it is the lack of compatible instruction manuals." The simplicity and depth of the analogy silenced the room. He did not see himself as disabled. He saw himself as different, and he invited the world to do the same. Their story has become the stuff of modern legend, a tale of how a mother's faith can move mountains. But for Priya, it was never about blind faith. It was about observation. It was about the courage to believe what her own eyes told her, even when the whole world told her she was wrong. She didn't ignore Rohan's diagnosis. She embraced it and looked beyond it, searching for the person behind the label. And in doing so, she found not the limitations everyone else pointed out, but the gifts no one else could see. Her journey was a testament to the power of true listening. When Rohan won his first International Linguistics Award, he couldn't attend the ceremony in Europe. His mother took his place. Priya took the stage to accept the award on his behalf. She didn't read a speech he had prepared. She told the story of his elementary school graduation. She talked about the skeptical audience, about the silent boy on stage, about the 6 languages, and she ended her speech by saying, "This award is not for my son's genius. It is for the courage of all children who are different, and for the faith of all mothers who refuse to let the world tell their children who they are." The ovation she received was as thunderous as the one Rohan had received years earlier. In the end, the greatest lesson Rohan taught the world was not in his complex articles, but in his simple example. He proved that communication is about much more than words. It is about patterns, about sounds, about looks, about one person's silent faith in another. He showed that language barriers are not the hardest to overcome. Barriers of perception are, and that the human mind in all its diversity is the most beautiful and mysterious thing in the universe. He didn't need to speak to change the world. He just needed to be himself. And so the boy who heard the secret music of the world and the mother who learned to hear it from him continued their journey. They did not seek recognition, only understanding. And in the process, they gave hope to countless families, redefined the concept of intelligence, and proved once and for all that the most powerful voice is not always the one that speaks the loudest. Sometimes it is the one that, amid the deafening noise of the world, has the courage to whisper a truth in a language that only the heart can understand. He didn't seek revenge. He just wanted to thank his mother. And with a tablet and a voice in 6 languages, the boy everyone underestimated ended up restoring humility to a community and pride to a warrior mother. Sometimes we believe that intelligence lies only in high notes and quick answers. But this story reminds us that the truest genius often resides in silence, in observation, and in the courage of a mother who refuses to accept the limits that the world imposes on her child. If this story touched your heart, just like it did Rohan and his mother, Priya, write the word faith in the comments. I promise to read every single one of them. And if you believe that everyone has a gift waiting to be discovered, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any. Because sometimes the most brilliant mind in the world doesn't speak our language. We are the ones who need to learn theirs.